Welcome to another episode of Coffee and Tea, Talking Art with Marquines.
Hi, everybody.
My name is Marija, so this is the time for you to grab a cup of your favorite drink and join us for a little chat about, this time is going to be about...
Solving the next problem.
Yes. So I know that you talk often in your workshops and even when you work with students about the act of art making as the act of solving the next problem.
Right.
So why is it?
Well, I'm intrigued by this process that we as artists engage in the studio and how that takes place and how it's very different for all of us. Not just the physical act, obviously, but the emotive act, the intellectual act, the intuitive part of it. And I'm struck by this balance or this marriage of the intellect versus the intuition. The intuitive part of the decision-making process versus the intellectual part of the decision-making process. And it seems reasonable to me to suggest that every decision we make is in some way or another having a problem that's being solved or a solution that we're attempting to put forward. I'd like to start, if I might, with a short quote here by Richard Demoncourt. I have this on my wall. He says here, "The putting down what I felt in terms of some overall image at the moment today, and perhaps being terribly disappointed with it tomorrow." Well, I know what that's about. You think at the end of the day, yeah, this looks pretty good. And then you wake up the next day and you look at it and go, So I relate. Trying to make it better, and then despairing and destroying, partially or wholly, getting back into it, and just kind of frantically trying to pull something into this rectangle that makes sense to me. So this idea, Maria, of something making sense to us, that's a feeling. It feels right or it doesn't. And I'm intrigued by how this union of the intellectual process and the intuitive process weave in and out from the beginning to the end of a painting. And we were talking earlier about the spectrum. I think at one far end of the spectrum, there are a few people, I suppose, I'm going to say a few, who work in a very formulaic fashion. They've got everything mapped out, figured out, all the colors are pre-mixed. Then it's just a matter of execution. So I'd say that's a highly intellectual process. At the other end of the spectrum, I think there are artists who are really intuitive throughout, and they're just throwing paint down. They're not thinking much. They're mark making and just scrambling. And yes, of course, at some point they may reflect. But I would say that that's a highly intuitive process. I am right in between there, back and forth.
It was interesting to me when you just read this quote. I had this sense of, wow, he's really struggling. It's like a battle that is happening. That's just what those few lines evoked in me.
Yeah.
And when we were talking about the subject for this talk, when you said problem solving, I offered an option of thinking about it in a maybe different light. For me, it's more facing challenges. It's kind of a softer approach. For me, a problem is already a negative. It's a problem. It's a problematic, and solving problems is very intellectual for me and requires a lot of effort and even frustration. But to me, art making, I would prefer actually thinking about it as facing challenges. We create these challenges in the process, and sometimes the piece of art that we're creating is going to, in a way, face that challenge, put it in front of us. So it's like the piece is challenging us to make the next step, to make the next move. But a challenge to me evokes more of that curiosity. It's like a positive invitation to be creative and to face it and to work with it. A problem somehow is more like a battlefield. So that's just my take, I guess, on the same process. That's how I would look at it. I don't know what you think.
Well, I think the two terms are really synonymous. The challenges do create problems. The problems can either be Oh, minor or major. The moves that we make in the studio can be major or minor. But at the end of the day, you are attempting to find solutions to what either feels not right or what have you. So again, for myself, I know that in the beginning, I typically work in a more intuitive fashion. Things happen quickly because I don't know what's going to happen, and I'm clear about that. And I don't expect it to make much sense for quite some time.
But are there problems already in that beginning phase?
Yeah, there are challenges at the beginning. What scale am I going to work on today? What brushes am I going to use? What colors will I mix? And all of that is, challenges or finding solutions. But it's much more, it's happening much more quickly for me in the beginning. So I don't give it a ton of thought. The intellectual is not kicking in that much.
So hold on, before you start painting, let's say you want to make a painting,
Right.
Is choosing the size of a painting a challenge / problem to itself?
I would submit that every single decision I make, from the very beginning to the last little move, is a problem that's being solved.
Are you putting a lot of problems in front of you?
I do. Every single, yeah, and that's what led us to this discussion. And it's not that, it's not that I'm saying to myself, oh, here's another problem that I have to solve. That's not happening.
Mm-hmm.
But when I think about it intellectually, that's exactly what's happening. Right from the beginning, what tools, what materials, what colors are being mixed throughout the whole proceedings. And I think that most artists, Marija, would say to me and to you, oh yeah, it's a wrestling match from the beginning to the end. It's making moves, stepping back, feeling whether that's right or wrong, looking at it, and that's where the intellect kicks in for just a moment. Then the intuitive part kicks in, you're grabbing a brush and you're laying down a color, you step back, it feels right or it doesn't, it looks right or it doesn't. I think when it feels right or wrong, that's the intuitive kicking in. But then the intellectual goes, well, maybe I need a lighter shade of a color here. Maybe I need darker values. And those become intellectual decisions, you see. And they're constantly working in unison.
I think that what it sounds like to me when you're talking about is that like you're constantly stepping from one realm into the other. Mm-hmm. So in my head it's like, well, no, there is a distinction, but we are working with both all the time.
Absolutely. It's what Betty Edwards, the author and artist, mentions about the right side of the brain. Mm-hmm. So for her, the left side of the brain hemisphere is more intellectual. It's more trying to solve problems in that fashion, where methodical was the word I was looking for. Whereas the right side of the brain is more intuitive. It just, things flow. So, but that's the interesting thing. When do things flow? Mm-hmm. When things are flowing, I would submit that it's more intuitive and less intellectual. That the thinking part is just kind of there guiding our moves, but the intuitive is really feeling this is right or it's not right. Mm-hmm. And you're right, it's never one hemisphere or the other. Obviously, there are two hemispheres working together. Yeah. But also what I'm intrigued by is how do we deal with this? Some people can be very zen throughout. Like, okay, I made a mistake, no problem, I'll fix it. Others, like myself, get a little more emotional, maybe curse at the painting now and then, or I can remember as a young painter getting very upset and throwing paint at the canvas because I couldn't figure stuff out. I'm better at that now. But that to me is intriguing also. How do we deal with the process when things aren't going our way? And then how do we solve that?
Right. And maybe, yes, how do we approach it? I am constantly in my mind as we're talking about it, coming back to that, what would make me more at ease or be more friendly towards the work that I'm trying to create and the process. And that is to soften a little bit and not see it for my head as a problem, but more as like a conversation or a challenge or a dance, or I would translate it in my head into some other form of relationship, so to speak. And the other thing I wanted to mention is this process that, for example, for me in the yoga practice is very it's always there, and that is you act and then you reflect. So you do, and you just do it, but then the residue and what's left after that, when then you pay attention to what is, happening inside of yourself, physically, emotionally, and so forth. So seeing an artist observe the work of art, to me, is that like, okay, I acted, I did something, and I wasn't maybe measuring my every move, but at some point I have to reflect, I have to sit with it and then think about it, right? But also like process the feelings. So that happens in the brain intellectually, trying to name and figure out what's going on inside, intuitively, emotionally, and so on.
Yeah. What's helped me a lot in years, in the previous years, is this idea of non-attachment. That I love this act of discovery. We talked about the act of discovery in previous talks. I look at it as a journey. Every painting to me, small or large, is a journey. And I'm getting much, much better now of thinking of it as a journey. And it might take me days, weeks, or months, but it's about patience. And for me, it's really about non-attachment. So I can let go, I can paint over, I can scrape out for the betterment of the journey.
Right.
And that to me has been huge. It's been a huge lesson. That's why I think we have life lessons in the studio. I think most artists would agree with that. And for me, it is about non-attachment, letting go, accepting our failures. Can't tell you how many times I've ruined something thinking, oh no, that went away. Well, it went away and something else is waiting.
I remember when I watched the documentary on Picasso, where they are filming as he's painting through the glass.
The glass, right.
And then he was asked, well, how do you feel? I mean, he starts with it was like, I think
the goat.
The goat, yes, and then it becomes a chicken, and then it becomes like a bull, and it's all these transformations. So they asked him, well, but you lost all these beautiful paintings in the process, and he said, well, yes, but I'm here now. I got here, right? I needed to do all that so that I get to where I am now.
Yeah, and this business of getting lost, that to me is part of the problem solving. Knowing when, oh, I'm lost here. What do I do? Well, usually I sit and stare. I just sit and stare. And I think when I work with my young artist students at CCA, I explain to them, look, folks, it's so important not to paint while you're painting. It's really important just to stare and look, because that's when you realize how to solve that next problem, small or large.
And now that you mentioned your students, I wonder if for you, being comfortable with naming this process, problem solving, comes from the fact that you teach. So when you teach, you have to give them some concrete tools to work with. And so here's the problem, here's the potential solution.
Yes.
So maybe that's where that is coming from.
Well, and that's true. Well, yeah, and because there's many solutions to a given problem, or as you say, challenge. I like the idea of challenge. Everything we do is a challenge. And so yeah, I think they're synonymous, but you're right. I may say to the students, here's this week's work, here's your problems or challenges to solve. There are many potential solutions. So experiment, experiment, which is always going to lead you to discovering the solution.
Well, I'm happy you're adopting now the word challenge, because I do usually hear you name that problem. That's the word that is coming from your mouth.
Well, we could be engaged here in semantics. In fact, as you know earlier, I went to the dictionary and looked up the difference between the definition of challenge and problem, and they are synonymous in terms. It has to do with solutions. It has to do with looking at what's not right, what doesn't feel quite right, what's not setting right with us, and then solving that. And yes, it's challenging, and yes, it's problematic. I think maybe what you're perhaps responding to, Marija, is I've got a problem,
problems are serious.
You knit your furrow brow and you go, I've got a problem. But let me ask you something. When you're making your jewelry, it's a fairly zen activity, I think, watching you. But are you not deciding which bead to work with next? And is it kind of like a puzzle? When you put together a puzzle, I think of painting.
To me, it's a challenge. It's not a problem. To me, the moment I think of something as a problem, it triggers a different response. It is more about like, okay, let me get serious here and
knitted brow.
fix the problem or solve the problem.
Right.
But challenge is more, it just softens it up and it's more inviting to engage for me. So yes, for me, it's just that the certain word has a certain association and meaning.
So maybe the next time I'm in my studio, Marija, and I'm stuck in a painting, instead of screaming out, I've got a problem here, I'll just say, I'm challenged here.
Well, I think that, but what you mentioned, that we all react differently to certain things.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you might be the person who likes problems and loves problems and does not relate to a problem the same way that I do. And
Absolutely.
so that's why I don't think that one word or one approach is better than the other. I think that everyone needs to find their own approach to how to solve and how to, if it's important for someone to give it a name, is it a problem or a challenge? But it's not so much about the word, it's more about how we approach those
it's the act, the process.
It's how we approach that something that is put in front of us.
And look, for some people, the so-called problem/challenge can shut them down.
Exactly.
It could shut them down.
Exactly.
They walk away and go, I can't deal with this.
Exactly.
You know? And therein lies patience.
Yeah.
Therein lies resilience.
Mm-hmm.
Therein lies perseverance.
Mm-hmm.
All the things necessary. And this is true of all the arts. If I'm a writer, same thing. A musician trying to work out a piece. An actor memorizing his or her lines. All of that.
Mm-hmm.
This is what the beauty of the creative act.
Yeah. Is
that journey into the unknown, the act of discovery, and being creative in facing our challenges and problems.
Yep. So I would like to hear from you in the comments about, do you prefer one word to another or one approach to the other? Or maybe you have your own word and your own approach to describe the creative process, right? The communication, the dance, the growing together with a piece of art that you're trying to create.
And the not knowing. This is interesting to me. I can be more comfortable now in my later years of working of not knowing.
Mm-hmm.
Before as a younger artist, I need to know, I need to figure it out. Now I'm relaxing behind not knowing.
Are you saying you don't have the solutions to all the problems?
Not at all. I wish I did. Actually, I don't wish I did, because then life would be really boring.
Well, we want to hear from you as well. Thank you for sticking with us for another episode of Coffee and Tea, and we'll see you again next month.
Bye, folks. Ciao.